What's going on, YouTube? Culturedog Sam Hatch back here with another 80s Mania video. We're almost at the big finale, the big final rush of the last 5 videos. So all the stuff you've been waiting for is going to happen soon. But we're going to take another little bit of a sidestep here and do something a little bit different. And I do have an idea to continue this in the next series. I want to do a video on my favorite 80s music videos, but we're going to save that for part 2, because I can't do all the killer stuff. It can't be like, front loaded with all the killer stuff. I got to save something interesting for the second batch of videos in the future at some point. So we're going to do 80s videos, home videos, things that came out on Laserdisc and VHS in the 80s. And they could be a compilation of music videos, or a live concert, or a film that largely features music in some fashion, and live performances or faked live performances. So it's kind of a broad spectrum, but it's music, videos, home videos, or films, music. Let's just say that. Number 10 is Rush, A Show of Hands. And I easily could have done Exit Stage Left, or there's a very nice Grace Under Pressure tour release, but this was bigger. This was a live concert tied in with Rush supporting Hold Your Fire. So later in the 80s, but they had not only a huge back catalog of their killer 70s, prog rock and just hard rock material. They also had at this point a pretty big back catalog of their 80s, more synth-based, kind of moodier, new wave-ish material. So they had a killer stash of stuff to play. And I originally had this on VHS because I didn't have a Laserdisc player into the 90s, but I do now have the Laserdisc copy, but I have copies because there are 2 versions, one with and one without lock and key, and there's a whole way of finding out which is which, but we'll get into that in another video at some point. But yeah, so it's got a lot of the stuff from Grace Under Pressure and Power Windows and Hold Your Fire, and then even stuff from the earlier 80s. Obviously Subdivisions is on there, but then towards the end they start cranking back time and doing stuff like doing moments of 2112 and doing Closer to the Heart, etc. So it's not all newer stuff, but yeah, it's definitely that era with the keyboards and Geddy Lee's crazy like Daniel Boone hair, super mullet, and it's just it's funny how like through this period Alex Lifeson looked like he kept getting young, even though he wore suits. He looked like he kept getting younger and younger. So good. And so it definitely captures the band at that period, and it's kind of the best snapshot of the 80s era Rush. So yeah, obviously there's plenty of stuff to follow, and if you're more into the kind of harder edge Rush stuff, there's more options out there for you. But for 80s Rush, this is like ground zero for live material, and it's classic. Yeah, you got to get it on. I had the CD as well, and the reissued CD and all that stuff, and I needed to get it on LP though. I never had an LP of it. But show of hands, who likes this? Yeah, me. You too, probably, maybe, if you like Rush. Number 9 is Roxy Music, The High Road, and it is a live concert from Fréjus. It's a live concert from France from early 80s and the Avalon period. And it's funny, I really slept on Roxy Music Avalon at the time. And I really got into it a little bit later after discovering Brian Ferry when he did Is Your Love Strong Enough for the Legend soundtrack. And then I started realizing how damn good Boys and Girls and Bête Noire were. And then Avalon fit nicely in with that kind of vibe, that 80s Brian Ferry vibe. So this was cool stuff. And I had the Heart Still Beating CD, which was that same concert, but it came out on video before that CD even came out as The High Road. There was a High Road EP, but that was different stuff. That was only 4 songs or so. But this is a full show. There's an analog Laserdisc, but then also a digital audio Laserdisc. I definitely recommend picking that up if you're an LD fan. And yeah, it's just really tight performances. It's a good mix of the 80s Avalon vibe and everything down the line in the Roxy Music catalog. So yeah, it's just hot performances. Number 8 is a release that sadly is quote unquote out of print. Like there should be a nice like Blu-ray or DVD reissue of this. There's bootlegs galore of it though, so it's really easy to get, and there are digital copies online available at all times. But is Combat Tour Live: The Ultimate Revenge. And the concept, I mean, there were a lot of metal compilation videos at the time with just whatever bands kicking around, but the bands kicking around this time happened to be Exodus, Slayer, and Venom. And as the years went on, that combination just kept getting more and more potent and powerful. And then by the time like people were thinking about this in modern times, you're like, dear God, Exodus and Slayer in like 85 in the same venue. Not to mention Venom. So Venom is kind of the outlier here because their stuff is bogus on this release. It's taken from other performances in other locations, I think Switzerland and England, and it's quite obvious that the stage isn't even remotely the same stage. But the Venom interviews on there, because there's interviews as well, are really fun and definitely worth checking out. But it's the Slayer and Exodus performances that are just seminal thrash metal moments. And there's also bits with the fans out in the streets, and anyways, so the concept is the ultimate revenge against disco, because this is at Studio 54, and it's nobody knows what's gonna happen. This is like the early stages of thrash metal, and people could destroy venues at any given moment. I've got some great videos of fans, at the Felt Forum in '88 destroying that place during a Slayer show. So it's the ultimate revenge against disco. These like thrash metal maniacs are set loose in Studio 54. And so it's early Exodus too. So it's just all the killer tunes, Piranha, No Love, and Slayer's rocking like Hell Awaits era stuff, and it's just badass. And there's only 2 tracks from Venom, and like I said, they're taken from other sources, because I think Mantis wasn't even at the show. I think there were replacements for Mantis on this tour because of like chickenpox or something like that. But yeah, it's it's on tape. If you can find the original VHS, it's probably worth some dough. But there's digital options out there. Number 7 is Alan Arkish's Get Crazy. And this thing was a cable entity that came into my life. I didn't know it hit theaters. I had already seen Rock and Roll High School when this came out. But Get Crazy was just a super fun celebration / lampooning of rock music and venues and the whole concert promotion biz all together. Daniel Stern's in it, Stacey Nelkin's in it, Ed Bakley Jr.'s in it, Lou Reed is in it. That's the cool thing, because it's like poking fun at music, but it's playing along with music. There's a bunch of fake bands in the film, but there's a lot of real musicians also involved in the band. And it's funny, it's got Lou Reed playing this super self-obsessed Bob Dylan-esque character who's supposed to be like the big star to save this show, but he's stuck in a taxi cab the entire movie for the most part, and he's just strumming his guitar in the back, kind of in a poetic way, commenting on the the reality of life around him. So he's like, "We're all gonna die, we're all gonna die." It's cheesy early '80s humor, like the Alan Arkish kind of vibe. It's not too far afield from your airplanes and all that stuff, and there's a lot of very broad jokes in the film, but it's so crazy, and the excesses of rock and roll are brought to life in some great fashion, including the space cowboy drug pimp guy. I don't even want to ruin anything about it. It's so awesome and outlandish and amazing that when it happens, it's going to blow your mind. Malcolm McDowell is also in there as this Mick Jagger-esque character who, and there's a conversation with a penis in one scene. All sorts of bizarre things going on. And Lee Ving is in the film as this crazy guy Piggy, who's the band carries him around in the trunk of a car and sets him free. He's kind of like Animal from the Muppets, but in crazy punk rock form. There's so much cool about Get Crazy, and there's actual some music in there too. So Yeah, you should check it out. There's some interesting people involved in that film, and sadly, it is a biatch to find. I've been trying to get the Japanese Laserdisc because it's not available elsewhere on Laserdisc. I've been trying to get that forever. So again, taped off cable VHS is my only option to watch this film. I think there's probably some digital copies out there illicitly, but I don't know. Get crazy. Number 6 is Walter Hill's Streets of Fire, which didn't connect with people when it came out, and it didn't even connect with me at first when I watched it, even though I was fascinated by it. It is very 80s musically, but it's not that connected with, kind of like Fast Times at Ridgemont High. It's got one foot in the 70s and like another toe like in the 50s, because there's this whole kind of like greaser new wave mashup aesthetic going on in the film. So there's all sorts of different stuff stylistically, but there's not that much new wave proper. There's some fix on the soundtrack, but it's got a lot of Jim Steinman stuff. So if you like that, you're gonna dig Diane Lane's songs and her performances. But there's also like early version of a cover of Stevie Nicks' Sorcerer, well before that became a quote-unquote hit with her and Sheryl Crow. Some Tom Petty written stuff and really interesting things on the soundtrack. Good stuff, and the Dan Hartman song, which I Can Dream About You, which was a mega hit. But it was just kind of a movie nobody asked for at the time. This weird mix of like 50s culture and 80s culture, which happened a lot. There was a lot of like kind of 50s throwback stuff with Eddie and the Cruisers, etc. But it was just this comic book rock and roll fable that nobody knew they wanted. And I think it's found more of an audience now. But Michael Pare is pretty cool in it, and Willem Dafoe and Amy Madigan and Rick Moranis, and there's a great Shout Factory Blu-ray out there that you should definitely get if you're at all interested in Streets of Fire. And of course I have it on Laserdisc too, though it's not Letterboxd. Damn it, I need to get a Letterboxd copy. Streets of Fire. Number 5 is an obvious one. This is Spinal Tap. And while it is a mockumentary, a fake documentary documenting a British rock and roll group that because it's made up, they're able to have it span this huge amount of time. So they're not only like a spoof of the Beatles at one point, they're also the spoof on like any 70s giant stadium rock band, and also a spoof of 80s glam metal bands. And so it's a bit of everything because it can get away with it. But Rob Reiner directed, and nobody was expecting this thing. There was a bit of a precedent with the Ruddles, which was the spoof on the Beatles that Eric Idle did, but nobody was prepared for this as Spinal Tap. But then the extra joke was that the tunes weren't bad, and that everybody was playing instruments for real. And Christopher Guest is in there as Nigel Tufnell and Michael McKean and Harry Shearer, and they're all fantastic characters. And there's some great comedic moments. It takes every little bit that you've heard about Hollywood or rock and roll excess or every Van Halen story, and then kind of puts it in this film and just pokes fun at it, and but plays it seriously. These characters all take it very seriously, so the only people finding it ridiculous are you, the viewer. And there's some great home video releases of it along the way. There's a Criterion Collection Laserdisc and a couple special editions, etc. So if you haven't seen it yet, do check it out. But the legend of the band continues. Multiple actual albums have been put out, and and the tunes are great. There's great songs like Sex Farm and Big Bottom. This is Spinal Tap. Number 4 also toes the line of mockumentary. It is a documentary by Penelope Spheres called The Decline of Western Civilization Part 2. And interestingly, as huge into hardcore and early 80s punk and that whole scene as I was, I didn't know that much about The Decline of Western Civilization Part 1. I had the album because, of course, it's got Fear on there and The Germs and X, and the album was this staple of listening, but the movie itself was just vaporware. I couldn't find a copy of it at all. But then Part 2 came out, and I was definitely entrenched in the thrash metal scene at the time. So it's you know, it's one, and it used to be, you could see it on cable a lot. MTV would actually show it, and the access to this film was much better than part one. But it was frustrating. It was just about as frustrating as watching Headbangers Ball at the time, because there was this show dedicated to metal on MTV that would most of the time show glam metal and hair metal and all this stuff that wasn't very heavy, and that you could see in current rotation all day long. So there was this special show to help kind of showcase the stuff you didn't normally get to see, and then you got to see the stuff you normally got to see, and maybe, if you were lucky, a Coroner video. Maybe. So yeah, there was that kind of disappointment with this film as well, because there's Megadeth prominently featured in it. There's Lemmy prominently featured in it. But most of the film is celebrating and also, you know, snidely kind of making fun of the LA hair metal scene and the guys that were, you know, coming up at the time that went, you know, nowhere, at least with these particular bands like London and Odin. So yeah, there was that bit of a viewer kind of resenting that you're watching these guys that not only do you don't think are going to make it, but you actively dislike, you know. And, you know, Sam Gazzari's in there as this kind of creepy character, and there's a lot of stuff at his club. And yeah, everyone trying to promote this band Odin, and yeah, and it's, you know, real musicians are involved, and then you don't really hold any grudge against them, but because it's trying to show what's going on in LA at the time. So there's a lot to make fun of or you know, or trash. And I want to see more cool thrash metal bands and stuff, and or even just more stuff with Ozzy, and you know, and of course there's the notorious stuff with Chris Holmes in a pool drinking vodka, and you find out a lot of the stuff was kind of staged. There's some stuff that's obviously staged, like Paul Stanley giving an interview with all these, you know, scantily clad models in bed with him as the camera is actually like poised above his head and pulls back, and you reveal he's giving an interview in bed with a bunch of women. So yeah, it's kind of hokey, it's kind of staged, but there's a lot of fun stuff in it, and the Megadeth stuff is interesting, and the super religious zealots giving their opinion about how evil metal is really interesting, and the Lemmy footage is of course delightful. And there's a great Shout Factory Blu-ray combo set with part 1, 2, and 3, and a lot of bonus stuff out there. So it's an issue, and it does capture the kind of that interesting period when you had like really hard-edged thrash metal and beyond, and then you got all this glam metal and how they kind of intersected. And LA obviously was, you know, part of the reason Metallica left to go to San Francisco, because it, you know, Slayer kind of made a go of it, but LA wasn't the place you wanted to be if you were in like a heavier side metal band. So it really does capture that dynamic, and yeah, so it's still fun, and the interviews are delightful, even if you're making fun of the subjects or laughing with them or laughing at them. No matter how you come at it, it's entertaining. Number 3 is Iron Maiden's Live After Death, and this was a tough one because I also equally love Maiden England, and I can make an argument at any moment that one is actually more important to me personally. But yeah, I gotta go Live After Death. It's great stuff. Filmed at Long Beach in a couple nights. They did like a 4-night stint there in California, and on the Power Slave tour, the World Slavery tour. So all like classic Maiden stuff coming at you. So it's definitely core badass stuff, like, and any of the stuff that any random guy in a modern Maiden concert is yelling out for them to play, it's probably on this set list. So, and the cover art is fantastic. Derek Riggs outdid himself. Just beautiful blue and yellow tones, but like hyper colorful. It's gorgeous. You should get it on Laserdisc, and you should get it on DVD and VHS and everything. So Iron Maiden, Live After Death. Number 2 is Pink Floyd's Delicate Sound of Thunder. And while I do enjoy Pulse a little bit more, which was their 90s live video on their tour supporting the Division Bell, this is a very proper late 80s documentation of Pink Floyd, or Pink Fraud as my friend called them, the version of the band sans Roger Waters after a momentary lapse of reason dropped. And it's filmed at Long Island in New York, Nassau Coliseum, and it's, yeah, really, really gorgeous stuff. And it's funny because I remember being jealous of my dad because my mom bought him like a birthday present or whatever, tickets to go see the show at Madison Square Garden, I believe it was. And he was disappointed that, because it starts off really heavily leaning on the momentary lapse of reason material, and he was really pissed off that they weren't just playing all his favorite, vintage 70s Floyd tunes. And my mom kept saying, relax, like, don't worry, they're going to play some of it. So it's funny viewing it from the lens of my frustrated dad, because but I'm a huge momentary lapse of reason fan, and I know he likes that album too. But at the time, it was still a little fresh. Like, I think he maybe appreciates a little bit more now than he did at the time. And then he was also trying to make up for lost time because friends promised to get him tickets the next time they came around, and then he found out after the fact that all his friends had bought wall tickets, and nobody told him or thought of him. They just went and bought the tickets, even though he put out that blanket, like, if you hear about Floyd and have access to tickets, buy me one, I will pay you back. And yeah, everybody blew him off. So this was like that chance to make up for lost time. So I understand that disappointment. But that said, it's great. I love A Momentary Lapse of Reason, and more of the songs are present on this than are in Pulse, obviously, because Pulse is mixing in some Division Bell stuff too. And it's very similar. The stage show is very similar, and this is a little darker, so sometimes it's a little murky and hard to see what's going on. But that said, it's it's great stuff. And there's the mysterious allure of Rachel Fury, the background singer that everybody fell in love with back in the day. Something about her that, just freaks everyone out. And there's a little bit of filmed material from France, I believe, mixed in, but the audio is all from Long Island, New York. But yeah, Delicate Sound of Thunder. There's a gorgeous Japanese release, but it's missing one song that's available on the different versions. There was a bunch of different U.S. versions. Most of them are pretty ugly on Laserdisc, with the music disc emblazoned, taking up all the jacket artwork space. But yeah, definitely. I don't think has there been a proper DVD release since then? I don't know. You might have to look into it. But yeah, Laserdisc is the way to go if you're a collector. Get Delicate Sound of Thunder. And number one. Yeah, this was the nuclear bombs of VHS concert videos, or just music videos in general. Metallica's Cliff Amol, which goes by a couple different names, like the 1998 home video or the 2498 Laserdisc or the whatever. It was a celebration. It was around the same time Garage Days came out, a celebration of Cliff Burton, their bass player, who died tragically in 1986 while on tour supporting Master of Puppets. And this is mostly a collection of bootleg material. That it was cool because Metallica was always going funny, especially considering the Lars versus Napster characterization that the band was saddled with for so long after that. But yeah, they were actually cool with bootleggers and were fine with people submitting the stuff they had filmed for inclusion in this video. They called them sneaky Metallifuckers, I think. But yeah, it was just fun. It was like aimed directly at the fans. It had the cool like handwritten note replicated on the back of the VHS case. I also have the Laserdisc, which is seminal, but I actually had to, because I wanted to get the cassette, and I knew a guy who had it, and he didn't want it anymore, but he was going to sell it. And I mean, I could have just found a way to pony up the $20 and get it from Strawberries Records and Tapes, but he wanted a 6-pack of beer for it, and I was underage, so I actually had my parents, I had brokered this deal to get a 6-pack to give to this guy so he could get drunk and give me his copy of Metallica Cliff Amol. And it worked, and I got it, and I watched the living crap out of that tape. Because not only is the bootleg footage, there's also bits of studio grade or professional grade footage from TV appearances, etc. And a lot of that stuff is in the later the box sets they've been releasing in recent years. But the Day on the Green footage from San Francisco is amazing, with Cliff Burton doing that bass solo and intro to For Whom the Bell Tolls. And there's also some crushing stuff from Metal Hammer Festival in Germany, with like Fade to Black on there, and just Kirk Hammett's sound is just wicked in that. And then a lot of older stuff from the early 80s when Kill 'Em All was released, and the band playing with Kirk Hammett newly in the band, and the bit dealing with his guitar getting stolen by audience members, and there's just so much cool stuff, and as many moments of Cliff playing his anesthesia bass solo as they could find, and old interview segments and stuff with Dave Mustaine before he was booted from the band. And bits of the band, presently as they're, stealing things from liquor stores. But yeah, at the time I was in my thrash metal band Lost Boys, which was the band before Less Than Zero, which was the band before Near Dark. And I just remember hanging out with the guitar player. He's now a bass player. Shout out to Mike from Dead by Wednesday. We would just watch this video and just get so inspired by it. And I'd go downstairs and I'd crank up my PV Bandit 65 in my basement and pretend I was Kirk Hammett. And by the time the end credits of Cliff Amol ended, like, we had it in our heads that we were the next Metallica. So it was just so inspirational. And I'll still watch it, in a moment's notice. In fact, I'll watch it right now. So that's it for the music releases. Hopefully you guys had fun. A little bit of everything, and I've since picked up so many great 80s music releases that I could even do like a 80s Laserdisc collection or something, but there's so many options. I definitely will have some future ones to save, because there's so many awesome bands out there that didn't get represented at all in this list, so I apologize for that. But that's the number 10 through number 1 music releases.